All right, everybody, thanks for checking in. We have a great episode this time. This is Tony with the DIY Tool Shed podcast. And we actually have a guest. You're not just forced to listen to me talk about the DIY attitude. Today, I got a guy who has taken gardening to a whole different level. I mean, I garden and it's nothing compared to what Chris does. Chris has I've been to his garden. His backyard has been transformed into this incredible Eden. And it's like I am intimidated by his garden, by his yard. It's really kind of crazy. Hey Chris.
How's it going, Tony?
Hey, oh man, I'm so glad you could make it today. I'm sure all the people that two or three people that have been listening lately are glad too that it's not just me. But every podcast has to start somewhere. So we're in the first 5 episodes and we're getting everything kicked off. So I'm really glad you made it.
And some nice, thank you for the kind words on my garden. I know you've gotten a chance to see it when we did some honeybee stuff in the backyard.
We did.
I didn't really start off as a honeybee guy. I started off as a gardener and thought that honeybees would be a nice addition, and it turned into a whole new thing to learn. But my garden has kind of come out of a couple different avenues, if you will. Part of it was just wanting to have a nice garden in the backyard and make it a little bit creative. My little brother at the time was living in New York City, going to architecture school. He talked to me a lot about the rooftop gardens and the square foot gardening methods that they were using on those, vertical gardening and such. And then through my extensive tours to Europe on what I like to lovingly call a beercation, traveling over there to go explore breweries and other cultural sites. One of the things I would always notice, especially in Germany, was along the railroad tracks between the city, like where you come to the train station, the green space had been converted into these little like garden plots, little sheds, little areas, because so many people didn't have yards in their homes. And they also were using this vertical gardening, square foot gardening kind of method. And so I modeled, even though it was in my backyard, I modeled my garden kind of as an homage to these rooftop vertical gardens and these European small lot gardens to maximize my space. And it also made it a little bit fun to have more than just your normal challenge of planting and digging some stuff in the ground. I did everything with raised beds, which built out of a lot of reclaimed deck lumber, and then of course new cedar lumber, and really took my, like you said, my gardening to a different level. But it's maximized my yields, minimized my space needed so I could still have grass and flowers and other parts of the yard. And it's kind of fun that you're talking at the, here we are, the beginning of January, because it's actually garden time. It's time to start planning for what we're going to do in April and May and the rest of the growing season. So what a great time. I'm already got my gardening books out. I'm already thinking hands in the dirt, even though it's 30 degrees outside here in Omaha.
That is awesome. And the nice thing, the thing I like about when I've always, gotten to visit with you, aside from the bee side, but in the garden side, I've just gone over there a few times to see, everything. And in the light of the DIY tool shed here is, I always say DIY, do it yourself, is an attitude. You don't have to be a professional or trained or certified somebody. It's got to be something that a person reaches out and says, I want to do this. I want to do this myself. And every time I have ever gone and talked to you and gotten you started on your garden, the passion that you discuss your garden with. I mean, you get into, and I've got this, and you're telling me just about everything, and you're not stopping to breathe. And it's that kind of passion that brings, to the DIY mentality, the DIY attitude. And this is why I thought of you when I thought of gardening. I happened to see, believe it or not, something of that, hey, you're going to be talking about gardens. and beekeeping and all that, this is the time to start preparing, because for beekeeping it's also the time to start preparing. But for gardening, it's like I didn't fully realize now is also the time for starting for that. So I thought, well, I know one guy that I've got to talk to, because he owns the DIY mindset for gardening without being a professional gardener, somebody, that makes a living out of this. But to look
Right.
at your yard, I would think you were. What do you get out? What made you say, I want a garden like this? You mentioned the whole, you were inspired by the
Right.
European methods and all that. But what really brought it home to you that you said, I'm going to do this? What are you getting out of it? What motivated you to kick in, say, I'm not just going to make a garden, I'm going to take it next step garden?
Sure. So first of all, when I was in elementary and junior high school, here in Omaha, I went to the King Science Center, which was a magnet school, and I was always interested in learning. And I'm kind of like Johnny Five from the old Short Circuit movie in the '80s. Input, input, input. Right. I always
Right.
want to learn something, and I might not be going off to study crazy things in college books and stuff like that to learn something all the time. Sometimes for me, learning something is just getting my hands dirty and a little trial and error and figuring it out. So there was kind of this mentality of how can I make my gardening go even further? And as I was looking at different things and plants you can start earlier in the season and things that can grow later in the season, I came upon a book which was actually given to me as a gift at Christmas, called The Four Season Harvest by Elliot Coleman. And Elliot lived up in. I haven't opened up his forward for a while, but I want to. If everything serves me right, he lives up in the Upper New England and Maine area, and he had noticed that if you took our temperatures that we have every year, we might be a little colder, but on our longitude and latitude lines, we're actually sun level wise about the same as the south of France. And in that area, they're growing certain things year round, something he had seen on a travel when he had been exploring Europe. And these little microclimates that involve against old style brick walls and the way they would use the earth and in all these old castle gardens and things. And what he realized was because of the way North America and the United States and the jet stream coming through Canada, we have colder temperatures, but we had the right amount of sun. So how could we start utilizing the area around us that Mother Nature gave us and in turn maximizing our gardening? I thought, okay, here's the little pseudo nerd from King Science Center inside from junior high days screaming to get out and have some fun. And I started looking at my garden and the area where I started building it. And it all really began when I took down the old cedar deck because it was starting to rot and had to put up a new deck. And you take those old boards, and I'm thinking, the ends are yucky, but the middles are still solid. So I started cutting everything into smaller pieces to put it on the save it for a project pile. And the first thing I did is I was like, all right, I want to make a compost bin. So I made a Renoir style compost bin. For those of you who have not looked at a Renoir style compost bin, but maybe have been interested in how you can minimize your waste in the landfill, a Renoir style compost bin is where you tend to have three separate bins and you kind of rotate it, and it takes a little longer than the average tumbler or such to make a batch of compost, but it breaks it down further. So I built this nice Renoir compost bin. It's my each compartment is about a 4-foot cube. You can lift the slats on the front so you can wheel your wheelbarrow up as you're taking the finished compost out. And then I started using the rest of the wood from the torn down deck to build a couple of raised beds. And in using the Elliot Coleman thought process, I was thinking, how can I make a raised bed that allows me to keep it a little warmer? And I was walking around at Menards several years ago, and they had those patio style greenhouses. They're like kind of like a small tent, the tubular frame with the clear plastic top and the zippers that you would normally just put on your patio to kind of jumpstart your garden season. Well,
Yep.
they have bolt holes in them. So I thought, okay, I'm going to build my raised beds to put these greenhouses on them. And I went at the end of the season that year and I got 4 of them on clearance. They were 4x8 greenhouses. And I made 2 raised beds that were 4 foot wide, 16 feet long, and 17 and a half inches deep. I used 4x4s on the corners. I used 2x6s on the sides, and I created my raised beds and got some dirt in and started amending it. And I kind of had already played around a little bit for a couple years with some soil mixes in different pots. I would get the same 4 tomato plants and I would mix different levels of cocoa fiber and perlite, vermiculite, compost, and dirt until I got the right mix that allowed it to retain water. So I didn't have to worry about it drying out in a raised bed as fast. But it would also be very loose and airy. So the roots had plenty of way to grow. And yet it also allowed me to add different nutrient and organic matter and just really make for healthy plants. And so I kind of put all these 3 things together. I put the greenhouses on top. I put my raised beds out there. In that spring, I got garden stuff, started putting things out there. And then I let it go as far as I could that winter. And it was well into November before, with those greenhouses on top, that the temperature was staying warm enough that even though it could lightly frost in the evening or something, they protected everything. And I was like, all right, cool. I pushed the boundary a little bit further. And so as I kept going, I kept wanting to expand my garden, and I just kept making more raised beds. So I went from the 2 4x16s, I added a 6x8, and then I made some little tower type things, which I refer to as my melon towers. And they are 31 inches by 18 inches with a set of tower type 2x2s on the sides, and then shelves that I made so that when I grow my watermelons and things, instead of taking up a big giant patch, I get them to grow vertically and rest on these little shelves. And it just kept growing. I added another 6x8. Then I added another 6x8. Then I added 3 more 4x8s. And I went across the whole length of my backyard below the power lines where the sun could be really well. And I was really able to start pushing my garden output. Everything's only 2 feet apart as far as my walk spaces, just wide enough for a wheelbarrow. And when I kneel down, since I'm short, the 2 feet gives me enough space to kneel down without having to turn sideways. So I can work in this little tiny compact area. And it just really became a fun way. I enjoy being outside. I enjoy, some people are like, yard work, gross. I'm like, can I just go outside all day long and just be out there by myself, listening to a little bit of music or radio and getting my hands dirty? It's very Zen-like for me. So it's been kind of fun to take what just started out as wanting to build a compost bin and a couple of raised beds, and has turned it into my own little mini urban farm.
You really have. Your gardens kind of really. I've seen they literally wrap and sandwich your yard. You've got like a little bit of grass in the middle of the back, but then you got your deck and you got a big a flower garden there, and then all around the perimeter and the outside perimeter is surrounded by garden beds. So like you just. Yep. Got this an actual small yard, but it's all the rest is this garden. And to hear you talk with all these names of stuff and all that, I'm like, I'm lost, but you sound like this mad scientist of gardening. Yeah. So, and I think that's just cool because as it's come out, it is beautiful in the summer. When you got all that stuff in bloom, it's just going it's a wonder. You walk in and it looks, I'm telling you now, and I'm not trying to blow smoke here, it looks like you've paid somebody who does this for a living to come out there. I mean, it's very well laid out and placed. You got some vegetables now, because I remember when you got bees, you said it brought about more vegetable planting and things like that. But I know besides that, you have this wide variety, or at least seems to be, of flowers. And if I recall, Chris, if I recall right, you told me that some of those flowers I've seen on you, because you go on vacation still to Europe and all that, to all that. Yep. You still bring European flowers back here.
Yes. So I added a lot of flowers after I started getting the honeybees, because I was growing things like tomatoes and peppers, and I thought, oh man, I've got a lot of flowers. The bees would love to be in my yard to help. And then you came over and you said, actually, the bees are going to go where they want for the food they want, and they're going to probably not go to tomato plants at all. And you live across the street from a school with a lot of clover, they're just going to go over there anyway. And so I thought, well, I don't have to make them work as hard if I add more flowers. So I started adding a lot of different things like zinnias and different types of asters and things that I would read about that were good for the honeybees, coneflowers and such. But before that, I had always in my travels, which started in 2008, I made my first trip to Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands. And it was in April. And I saw when I got to Amsterdam a couple of days before my flight was coming back to the United States, just the sheer amount of flowers that were just really, really pretty. And so a couple years later, I actually went back during the time when what they call it's really the world's largest array of spring bulbs, tulips, hyacinths, daffodils, crocuses, and it's called the Keukenhof. And it's just outside of Amsterdam, about 20, 30 minutes in the little town called Lisse. And I went the first time to this garden, and we're talking every fall, they plant in the vicinity of half a billion, 500 million bulbs in this giant acreage of places. And it is absolutely breathtaking to see these arrays. And every year has a theme, and they redo the designs. And I just was in awe of this. And I was crawling around literally at one point on the hands and knees because I smelled something and I had never smelled it before. And it turned out it was hyacinths. And just this aroma was just amazing. So I was reading more, and I started gathering up and buying bulbs when I would be over there in the fall, because these kind of bulbs you buy and you plant in the fall for spring growth. And I would bring back, a few packages here and there from the floating flower market in Amsterdam. And then I'd make it out to a couple other places and start finding some little better. And you have to make sure the ones you bring back are certified for transport by the Department of Agriculture, and they have to have a certificate. And I had to learn that if the certificates aren't dated properly, they won't accept them and everything. I lost a couple 6-packs of bulbs the first couple of times I tried, but you don't get in trouble. They just don't let you take them into the country. Right. I started bringing more and more bulbs back, and my largest bulb haul back from the Netherlands was 11 pounds in my suitcase. And I now...
Flower smuggler.
Right. And I now have every spring close to 3,000 bulbs that come up in my yard.
I'll tell you what, you can tell, because anytime I've gotten the chance to be over there, it is just beautiful. It's like walking into this I don't want to leave. I mean, you practically have to kick me out. And I notice your neighbors are all, you interact very well with all your neighbors. You got good relationships with them, and a lot of them really like your yard and your garden too. You bring a lot of positivity just through your own efforts in your garden out of the people in the neighborhood, the community around you. I've noticed this. I've heard them talk to you. Your mom is out there. She helps you with the garden, and she interacts with a lot of the neighbors too. And so here's this garden project that you've got. One guy, your family, your immediate family, you guys are there, and it started, like you said, just with a couple small things, and you build and you build, and now you've got this just really beautiful ongoing thing. And how many, what kind of educational background? I mean, did you end up, turning this into, like a horticulturalist thing, or are you just doing this because you like flowers and you like, vegetables?
Well, a little bit of both. So I've not had any professional schooling. I've looked at getting into the Extension Services Master Gardener program, although the dates and times this year all ended up getting canceled because of the craziness of COVID in 2020. And the other thing that I did, which I kind of have turned it into a side business in a way, is last spring, when everything was shutting down and everybody was, in a way, kind of panic buying, from toilet paper to hand sanitizer to garden seeds. Believe it or not, when you went around to the garden centers, nobody had hardly anything left. Now, I had a pretty fair selection of seeds. I would always start this time of year sorting out what I was going to grow and planting out my garden, looking at my spaces. I need to have 12 tomato plants. I want to have 7 pepper plants, some eggplant. And I would keep my seeds in a nice kind of cool, dark spot. And I would just sprout a couple of these and a few of those. And you always plant 1 or 2 extra, and you might give them to the neighbor or whatever. But I never would plant a whole lot. But I'd always in the back of my mind wanted to take the next little do-it-yourselfer, and I wanted to create a hydroponic sprouting system so I could do a better job of starting my seedlings. So often when you would start sprouting seeds, the hardest thing is to keep them evenly watered as they start germinating. And I thought if I could build some sort of a small hydroponic system that would work with some lights and everything, I could produce a little bit larger volume. And when everything shut down and there were not a lot of plants out and around, I looked at how many I had, and I took some of the free time I had since work was closed, and I put together a 2 tray with 2 4-foot lights and a hydroponic system with a couple of pumps, and I sprouted out all the tomato seeds that I had and a few other peppers and things, but every tomato plant. And I sprouted close to 150 tomato plants.
Wow.
And then I went and I sold them from my driveway with a low contact, like, I put on my Facebook, I had these kind of variety where I would just hang out in the front yard working on my flowers, and people walking around the neighborhood would stop and say, "You selling these?" And yep, plant sale, $5 a plant. And it was kind of nice. And so I'm actually already looking with my hydroponic system that I built. When I start sprouting things this year, I created an actual LLC called Bettini Farms, and it's on Facebook and everything like that. And I'm hoping to be able to do maybe a couple of the farmers markets this year, but I don't want to sell vegetables. Once I'm growing my vegetables and doing my gardening, I'm pretty busy with what I'm doing for my own garden. And so my thought is I'm just going to grow a whole bunch of organic and heirloom starts, focusing a lot on heirloom varieties of tomatoes and some unusual squashes, some different European varieties, and then sell those starts in the spring, and then let people also enjoy some gardening in their own yard.
See, and that's the cool thing. You have taken this and you've gotten to a point, and now what you really, in a way, could be doing, I can't imagine it's got to have happened at least once by now since you're selling them. You're helping other people get started on their own DIY projects, their own passion for doing things. And to me, that is just about, a full circle kind of a thing. That is as cool as it gets when you talk about DIY activity, attitude, because you're out there and you're passionate. The way you talk to people, you get people fired up about plants. I'm not much of a plant guy. I get fired up talking about plants when I talk to you. So I know how it is when these people are out there and you got you and the plants and them. These people have to be excited, and they have to be going home and taking that enthusiasm and starting their own little, DIY thing going. Now, I want to make a tradition out of this, and because you've gotten to a pretty good point, and in my personal opinion, I think you're not just your typical beginner level like a lot of people assume DIYers should be. You're pretty good at this. What kind of tips would you give give me a tip for somebody just starting, a tip for somebody who may be, relatively middling, and somebody who might be fairly experienced, but maybe something they don't, isn't common even amongst experienced people that you think would be a good tip or piece of advice for each one of those 3 groups of people?
Sure. So for me, I think for all your beginning people, the first thing to do, especially right now when there's not a lot of leaves on your trees, is to start kind of watching the way the sun goes across your yard and look for that area that you can choose to make your garden that seems to get the probably most even amount of sunlight throughout the day from, as we're in the shorter light period right now, I would say from probably around 8, 9 o'clock in the morning till probably around 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening. If that area on a sunny day stays fairly sunny, it's going to be even sunnier for the most part as we get into the longer season. And when you find that area that is going to work where you start your garden, then you kind of start thinking about how big of a space, and you can start thinking about how many plants that might be worth sprouting yourself, or to start planning on what you're going to be growing.
So that's kind of like
already done. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. No, I was going to say, so that's kind of like teaching them how to find their sweet spot, so to speak, for a garden.
Yeah, because you gotta make sure. I think one of the biggest problems a lot of people have with their garden is they aren't thinking the full picture. They're just saying, this is the area in my yard where I have space to put a garden. But sometimes the space for a garden might end up getting a lot of sunlight blocked in the afternoon by a big oak tree, or maybe is going to have where it doesn't get as early of sun. It only gets late afternoon sun, and that late afternoon sun is also much hotter. So those plants sometimes don't get that nice early part of the day growth that I actually feel that they're better if they have morning sun and evening sun, and not as much in the mid-afternoon when it's so hot. Let them kind of like us, if we're working outside all day on a D.I.Y project, right around 2:00 we're ready to go inside, grab some iced tea, relax for a few minutes before we go back out there. And our plants kind of like to have a little bit of that cool down period if it's always just sunny all day long. But it doesn't hurt them to have sun all day long, as you're prepared to make sure they also have plenty of water and things like that.
Cool.
For those people who have already done some gardening, my suggestion to them is to think about how to maximize your yield and maximize your growth. And that's where you can start looking at how to kind of train your plants. So, like, for example, I do a lot of pruning of my tomato plants to make sure they don't get too bushy. Now, that does mean I'm not going to get as many tomatoes, but the tomatoes I have are going to be bigger and more robust and flavorful. And then the same thing with some of the other vertical gardening. You're starting to train your plants to do what you want them to do, rather than just making sure that they're growing. And then as you get into that more advanced gardener, I would challenge somebody to find a way to reduce all of your food waste as much as possible into compost, including everything from your eggshells. If you're doing a lot of bone, like say you're boiling soups, and you can make your own home, like bone broths, not bone broths, but bone meals. And I even use all the ashes from my fireplace in the winter time in my compost bins. I add that in the second year after, and then I use it a year later after it's kind of settled out that potash level. And a lot of this is all stuff that I just, thankfully, we live in a time now that it's so much easier to find information, because it used to be you would go to the library and you would look in the library catalog. You'd find a nonfiction book you'd go get the book and read it, or you'd find the microfiche and you'd read the old articles of a magazine, or you might check out a magazine to take home to read and turn it back in. But nowadays we can grab our smartphone and we can Google, what can I put in my compost bin? And you can find a lot of information out. So I think that for me, the other positive part for gardening has been just reducing my footprint waste. I don't put out hardly any trash. These new trash cans the city gave us, I feel like it's a waste. I generally have one bag every week in there, if I'm lucky, from the kitchen, of stuff that can't be recycled or composted. So that's kind of my challenge for people, is to learning how to plant a garden, learning how to maximize a garden, and learning how to make your garden almost self-sufficient is kind of my master level person target of goals.
That is awesome. See, these are the kind of things I think people nowadays really look for. It's the what's the thing people aren't telling me? You know what I'm saying? And This is what we really want to pull in this podcast, and the guests that we bring in, like yourself. I would like to start being able to pull that. What are the books and the magazines and the mainstream stuff that, kind of echo each other after a while? What are those things not telling me? Because those are all the things that are easy to say and fit into quick sound bites, and, which is where most of your media and things keep plugging, because it's easy to plug. But It's not always the thing that people need to hear or what they're looking for. So we're going to take the opportunity, and you, I think, just hit a home run, because you clicked all three sweet spots on that just terrifically. And that's a sign of a great DIY mindset, because you being a DIY guy and being so passionate and enthusiastic about what you do, you've been there. You've got that mindset of you have that explorative thinking of saying, okay, I've done this, and all the books and this and that, but I feel like there's something else. And you might have had to do it the hard way and find, like you said, by trial and error. And now you've got the opportunity to say, you know what, here's what they weren't telling me. And
Right.
this is where the secret of DIYers, as we bump into each other and interact with each other and listen to each other on podcasts and in groups online, that's the sweet spot where we get to help each other hit that next level, because who knows, that next person that hears that, they hit and get a good stride, and they might pick up something because they were spared the struggle to get this. Now they get to tackle something else and maybe bring something back to everybody else that we've all, or people have struggled with. So it's kind of creating this nice little field of, of popping people up and getting people to do more. I do have one more question though. I know, sure, before we could finish this out, we're getting close, but I got one question. You bring in these plants from across the across the ocean here,
right?
At any point, did you find yourself intimidated by saying, wow, this is not something I picked up at my local mall halls or, wherever. This is something it's not something I had to get here. I paid or went through this extreme extra process or money or whatever. If I blow this, I'm blowing something significant. Did you ever find yourself intimidated by that?
No, because the varieties over there that they're marking right off the bat at some of the markets I've gone to aren't always the most rare kind of variety. But for me, it's that I know that if at certain points in my yard, that I know that trip, those flowers that I brought back, those bulbs, they were the year that I also, there was a time when I've brewed 3 collaboration beers in the Netherlands myself. And there are certain flowers that I know I brought them back after I brewed my collaboration, or after I led a tour group across there with several people, and to be able to kind of remember those memories. The nice thing with something like a bulb plant that comes back more every year, that you plant once and go from that, is that every year when it comes up, you can also kind of remember behind it, the stories that go with it. I'm one of those people that a good story just always makes everything that much more relatable. And so if I look across my flower yard and I can say, yeah, but you see those daffodils over there, that's the year that I went and I brought them back, and I had this and that. It has a little bit more meaning for me. So I think more so than anything, the different varieties I bring back are just a bookend of another journey and another story, more so than being really weird. I think the only time I could say that I was a little bit nervous is the time I did have 11 pounds worth of tulips, because I was like, I have a really short connection, and they're going to probably want to inspect every last one of these tags to make sure. And actually, that was the one year when the guy didn't even check my tags. I told him what I had done, and I had said they're all dated these dates after this and whatever. And he's like, have a good day, go on through. And I thought, man, I could have grabbed every unusual variety I couldn't normally bring home because they were going to check me, and I didn't. But I didn't do that, and I wouldn't want to, break the rules like that. But it is kind of fun. And now I actually have found some actual Dutch companies that I can order from here stateside and get some of the more rare things that I've seen at the flower markets, or I've seen over there that I can't bring home, but I can order them now that I'm here. So I'm starting to be able to add some of those more unusual things that I've seen on my journeys.
Your yard, your garden is going to be so much fun to visit, and as the time comes up, I look forward to the next time I get to visit you, Chris.
You're always welcome, Tony. I'll keep the iced tea nice
I
and cold
hear you,
for you,
brother. I appreciate that. And this brings us to the end of this episode of the DIY Tool Shed podcast. I hope everybody out there, I thank you all for listening, for coming and sitting down with Chris and I. I want to thank Chris because you came out and hit a home run. You great stories. I loved it. and
Thank
keep
you.
that spirit alive. Keep that DIY, that attitude going strong. Don't let things intimidate you. Find solutions and ways to work around whatever comes up in your way so that you find yourself successful no matter what your DIY activity is, be it gardening. And by the way, Chris, I may bring you back someday because I want to hear more about this brewing, buddy. The brewing is an interesting story.
It is definitely, and you can never ever give up, I should say, or your garden can never always be finished. There's always something new to do. My next project for this year is I've been working this winter on designing a self-watering water tower, hopefully with some solar panels and a pump so that I can water my garden when I'm on vacation. So we'll have to talk more about that one too.
Dr. Frankenstein of gardening, man. I'm telling you, you just rock, brother. All right, everybody.
All right.
Everybody have a great one. And we'll see y'all next time.
Thanks, folks. Enjoy. Happy gardening.
All right.